On Viewpoint today, we turn our attention to a significant figure in Nigeria's political history, General Ibrahim Badamasi Babangida. As a former military ruler and a key player in Nigeria's transition to democracy, Babangida's life and legacy continue to provoke discussion and debate. His recently released autobiography titled A Journey in Service offers a detailed account of his experience and insight, particularly focusing on the major events surrounding the 1966 coup and the June 12, 1993 presidential election, which remains a contentious subject in Nigeria's history. General Babangida governed Nigeria from 1985 until his resignation in 1993. His tenure was marked by significant economic reforms, military policies, and the controversial decision to annul the June 12 election, which was widely believed to have been won by Moshood Abiola. This election, often referred to as the freest and fairest in Nigeria's history, has left lingering questions regarding governance, democracy, and accountability. In his autobiography, Babangida seeks to address these unanswered questions, providing his perspective on the political landscape of the time and the rationale behind his decisions. This is Viewpoint. I'm Olaiton Babatini, and with me is Odiawa here. How are you doing today, Odiawa?
Perfectly fine.
It's good to have you on the show again.
Obviously.
All right, join us shortly as we go on a short break. You're welcome back to the show, and I'm Olaiton Babatini. So we're talking about the Badamasi new book, which is titled A Journey in Service. And growing up, I've been told to have heard, we were taught that the freest and fairest election we've ever had in the country was that of 1993, where Moshood Abiola won the election. Now, A Journey in Service is a long-awaited autobiography of General Ibrahim Badamasi Babangida, Nigeria's former military president, who ruled from 1985 to 1993. Briefly, tell us about the autobiography on Ibrahim Badamasi Babangida's A Journey in Service.
Okay, going on to the book, A Journey in Service, it actually gives a detailed account regarding IBB, as is popularly known as, his detailed account on his profile and his professional career. Now, talking about his personal life now coming from Niger State, even though some rumors making around is from some other states, which of course there have been no palpable evidence. Going over to his military career, it now has to do with where he grew up from, Niger State, then going through his military career with all the accolades and awards which has also gotten, his involvement in the coups, because he actually served under the military intelligence while in the army, because from there, how he also foiled some coup attempts, particularly during Muritala's era, 1976, going also to how he was accused of delivering the parcel or letter bomb to Dele Giwa of Newswatch, how he tried to clarify his name. Also, his policies, which he also introduced, of course, we call it SAP, which is a Structural Adjustment Program, just to mention a few, trying to modernize the economy, which was actually cut out for making sure that the government limits or quits its involvement in the economy, but rather taking up privatization, and also bringing up the issue of foreign investors. That was the essence of the Structural Adjustment Program, which, of course, was marred with all sorts of inflations and, of course, protests, which people didn't really approve of. Then also we have the popular June 12 election. But with all these which have surrounded IBB, the book also gives a detailed account of how he tried to be unbiased in his regime, whereby there was where he respected federal character, whereby everyone was duly represented in his regime, and also trying to pass over to the civilian system of government, even though at the end of the day it was undermined by his chief of defense staff.
All right. Like you said earlier, it was allegedly said that Babangida is not from Niger State. And, when we talk about patriotism, it means taking pride in your country. And let's just make that applicable to even the state you're coming from. Why do you think he would deny coming from that state?
Well, actually, if at all he was from that state and happened to deny, just like others must have done or may have done, it's a case of people trying to secure their future in a particular place. Why? Because there was a lot of ethnic discord during that period, and a lot of which was actually influencing issues at the national level. So you wouldn't want to undermine your own personal interest. Why? Because you have a chance on getting a particular slot, which of course a region, which was the northern region, they were more pronounced in the army. So being that you're from the western region, which was mostly the educated elites, they were not really cut out for the army. I'm talking from experience, right? Because writing the NDA exams, when you go to Kaduna or Lagos, you go to their command schools or centers, majority you see there are the south. But when it comes to the southwest, they are kind of very few. The only southwest states you actually see there are states from Ondo and probably Ogun states. Those are the ones which are really, really cut out for that. But the north is actually prominent when it comes to that. So maybe because of quota preferentials now, that was why he must have opted for that one. And hence people now coming to terms with the fact that he has actually denied this place because of quota to stick to Niger State. But how palpable or how realistic that is what we are not quite sure of.
All right, so moving on, in what ways does Babangida's autobiography now challenge or reinforce the prevailing perception of his presidency and its impact on Nigeria's political landscape?
So far, so good. All these occurrences, if you look at it, they took place more than 10, 20, 30 years ago. And if we now look at it, prominent figures who were actively involved in protests, whether aligned to him or against him, are currently 6 feet under the sand, or perhaps some of them are still alive and they are kind of elderly. So I look at it that probably, could it be he was waiting for people to be out of the way before he comes out with the truth, waiting to not be challenged? Because we have the likes of Tinubu who actually stood up to him back then in the 90s, why he did not approve of the June 12 elections. June 12 election is just one of the political happenings within his regime. Not that he didn't do anything good, but there are question marks which would actually be influencing the perception of everyone. Why did you actually wait and keep quiet for so long? From the people who are from the sectarian background, when I mean sectarian, I'm talking about Christians, Muslims, and just to mention a few. They are like, is it because where you're going to is closer than where you're coming from? So you need to make amends with your maker. So these are things you need to weigh in the balance. So if by the time you look at these options, there are so many rhetorical questions. Why did you actually wait? Why did you wait? So many people lost their lives. So many people died. So many families were displaced as a result of not speaking up. So frankly speaking, the missing link here now is IBB refusing to do the needful by speaking up when he ought to have spoken up.
Yeah, you know, I was going to ask you, like, why do you think he waited till this point to release that book, to talk about that election then that he denied was free and fair? But now coming to the 1966 coup, I'm sure our listener out there would also want to know, does Babangida's admission regarding the 1966 coup contribute to the discourse on national reconciliation and unity in Nigeria today?
To begin with, the coup, there's no how we will not talk about the coup now. Or if we are talking about Babangida's journey in service and this 1966 coup, there's no how we will not make reference to the ethnic discord which was actually taking place, which was actually being pronounced. It was a case of the North being prominent in the army as at that time. No one really knew the value of what was the army as at that point in time. And it was situated in Kaduna. The armory was also situated at Kaduna. But when you come down to the southwest, there were more of bookworms. You go down to the eastern side, there were more of, they were business inclined. When you come to the midwestern region, they were neither here nor there. Because that was the oil region. They were undecided about their fate. Now, practicing a regional system of government, it was a case of battle for territory. And who has to be supreme enough to control this territory to actually perpetuate relevance and dominance? You have the Southwest producing cocoa, which was also a wild, wild west region where they were also quarreling at that point in time. Of course, you had the pyramids of groundnuts in Kaduna before oil was actually discovered within this particular region. And this particular region, you also need to make sure that you secure your future. Now, coming to the 1966 coup, The Igbos, they termed it as the Igbo. It was actually termed as the Igbo coup. Why was it called an Igbo coup? It was because of the name Nziogo. He was like, we had Delta Yoruba, we had Delta Igbo. And Nziogo on his own part was from Delta extract, but he was born and raised in the north. So there are people, when you look at their features, because they've been born there, they've grown up there, they understand the language, so they are more Hausa inclined. He now engaged in the coup with just a few also to actually address political ills, because at that time, I mentioned the Wild West. There were so many happenings in the legislature within the West, so many disruptions in the North, and there were so many lootings. It's not today lootings started. So these fellows, to instill order, decided to take it upon themselves to inflict the coup, killing prominent northern leaders and also southern leaders, Mobology Bank Anthony, Akintola, Tafawa Balewa, just mention a few, Amadu Bello. But no Igbo top official was touched. Information making the rounds, according to history books, says that Zik would have also been eliminated, but he was out of the country. Now, with northern leaders being eliminated brutally, it was such that one of them, I actually saw the picture. One of them actually, after beheading a prominent northern leader, put his leg on top of the head, and the northerners didn't like that. Hence, the unleashing of mayhem on Igbos. That's why I began by talking about ethnic discord. You now come to the southwest now. The likes of Akintola, who was heading the western region, was actually killed also, and also other prominent Yoruba figures. Now, by the time you look at it, they will have loyalists. They look at it that no Igbo person was killed. It's only normal for the north and the west to forge an alliance and begin to attack the eastern region. Hence the commencement of the Civil War. And they began to slaughter them in the east. In the north, rather, I beg your pardon. So by the time you look at this discord, that was when the movement for Biafra now began. So his involvement also, foiling of the coup and trying to prevent some coup. As at that point in time, IBB then was a captain. So seeing all this, he couldn't step in at that point other than to follow orders.
All right, so let us talk about Ibrahim Babangida's perspective on the motivation behind the 1966 coup challenge, or reinforcing existing narrative about ethnic tension in Nigeria. Would you say that his own perspective and motivation in regards to that is enough for them to have done all they did during that time?
It's like having a scar after a particular injury has healed. Fine, the injury has healed after the medications, but the scar is still there. Someone can walk up to you and ask you what actually happened there. By the time you begin to explain, and not just explaining, you also give graphic explanations as to what happened. Some people can get emotional. And when they get emotional, it's either they get angry, depending on whether it was someone who inflicted it on you, or it was an accident, or maybe somebody wants to put something in place in a mechanized way to get you injured. That emotion now will now begin to dictate the actions of the person. So that scar now, it will now begin to dictate in the subconscious of people. Is he actually saying the truth, or is just trying to salvage or also act in a Maradonic way, as it was always called back then? So all these things, they need to weigh the variables and options.
All right. So we know presently in the country is unsettled. There's been a lot going on in the country. Now this big revelation, and people have to talk about it, because also whatever he just revealed now, there are truths that should have been said in the past. So which means Nigerians too are, they are disturbed about the truth. Like, why is it just coming out now? I think you said it earlier, like the link between this situation now is we don't know the reason why he decided to publish the book. Now, he could have done that years before now. Now, what impact do you think this historical revelation about the coup we have on contemporary discussions about ethnicity and governance in Nigeria?
Oh, well, with this recent developments now, it has to, in my opinion, people only have to act mature-minded now when it comes to ethnicity regarding governance. Because even though it's still pronounced, in Nigeria we have ethnicity here. You go to South Africa, we have apartheid. You go to the US, you have racism. You go to, among the Jews, you have anti-Semitism. So there's always a word to actually qualify discrimination or marginalization of a people, or divide, let me put it that way. Now, zeroing in now on ethnicity, we ought not to even see that, okay, this fellow is from this other place and this fellow is from this other place, if we're actually practicing a true system of federal system of government, rather. Because if, for instance, now a Yoruba guy, an Igbo guy, or a Hausa or Fulani fellow, they all jack back to the UK.
Sure.
They will have to help themselves when they get to the UK, because the UK is not their country. But why is it that when we are here, that is when that ethnicity is pronounced? Why? Because people in the background continue to sow this seed of discord because of that scar which has already been there. There will be people who will actually be sowing that seed of discord there, telling the story of what actually transpired there. So the earlier people break away from the norm of this ideology of ethnicity, the better for the Nigerian governance.
32 years later, IBB admits Abiola won the June 12, 1993 election, regret annulment. We'll take a break now. Join us shortly as we journey through the legacy of Ibrahim Badamasi Babangida on Viewpoint, as we zero in on another key event during the IBB regime, June 12. Join us shortly. Welcome back to the show. I'm Olaitan Babatunde, and with me has been Odiawa Hehai. Thank you for the enlightenment you did on the first part, when we're talking about the 1966 coup. Now, I would like you to tell us briefly, what was it about the June 12, 1993 election?
Well, the June 12 elections in 1993, as at that time I was still an infant. So okay. At least from the stories making the rounds from books, reports, findings, even from the elderly now, who were, of course, youthful back then, it was the IBB regime, which was, of course, for a decade running, trying to transition to civilian rule. Hence the establishment of two-party system from the SDP and the NRC. Of course, the SDP, which was Moshood Abiola, and the NRC, which was Bashir Tofa. Both people actually came in to contest the elections, but it was said by, of course, announced June 16 by Humphrey Nwosu, the then electoral umpire chairman, then it was known as NEC, that Moshood had actually won the elections. Of course, it still boils down to ethnic discord, let's tell it that way. But because of security reasons, that is where IBB now comes in, who was then the president, or military head of state rather. He was actually of the opinion now that there were security concerns that the country would have actually plunged into either chaos or another civil war, hence the annulment of the elections. Why? Because his chief of defense staff, who at the time was Sani Abacha, had announced that the elections be annulled, even when he was away from the whole system. As at that time, he was actually, we were watching the stories as of last week, he was actually in Katsina with the Yaradua family commiserating, while his chief of staff was actually undermining efforts. Now we look at it now, is it that the chief of staff now was insubordinate, didn't regard the head of state, or he was approaching it from the fact that his brother Tofa from the opposition, which actually lost the election, didn't win? So these are variables we should actually also look at. Okay. All encompassing, the June 12 election was because it was actually annulled, and we are now hearing it was a case of mistaken annulment, not from IBB now, but from Abacha.
All right. Now, how does General Babangida justify his decision to annul the June 12 election result, and what implication does this have for our understanding of leadership in times of political crisis?
When you're a leader, there's what we call crisis management now. And with the way he was actually addressed as a Maradona, he was always able of dribbling people and, getting away with it. Why? Because we needed to understand that he needed to create a soft landing, let me put it that way. Why? Because of the statement I encountered in the book. And that is, his regime actually believed in devolving of authorities, that is disseminating powers, and also taking up ultimate responsibility. So a situation whereby now in this case now I believe that the ultimate responsibility now was the elections, which he had to make sure that it didn't take place or wasn't even announced at all, or the whole confusion of annulment actually even set in. Why? Because the Abiola, who was actually meant to come on board as a winner, was not even brought up on board, like I said earlier on. Tofa was actually now meant to be announced as a winner, maybe because of ethnic sentiments. That again, we should look at it from another perspective. Why did he actually even go down that route? Why did he go down that? Why did he actually go down that route? Why? Because he needed to preserve the interest of Nigeria. That is a leader now. If someone who had actually witnessed a civil war would not actually want another war to actually take place. So I think maybe because of security concerns, that is why he had to protect the interest or preserve the interest of the country.
Now, in what ways do you think the events surrounding the June 12 election reflect the challenges faced by emerging democracies, particularly in the context of military influence and political maneuvering?
If we look at it closely, there's no how we won't talk about the political actors who were involved. You just talked about maneuvering.
Yeah.
We had the Nigerian, we had the Armed Forces Ruling Council, which was the highest ruling body. We had the Nigerian Security Defense Council, also another high ruling body. They had to meet to see how they can address this situation. Now, the likes of ABN, Association of Better Nigeria, was another faction that was actually undermining the efforts. I will say it that way, undermining the efforts of whatever transition had to take place from military rule to the civilian system of government, whereby they actually went against Decree 13 of the then military regime by going over to obtain a court order to make sure that the court doesn't hold. And the actual frontliner was Otto Nzeribe, who was actually a close friend of IBB. Okay. And I think he was against the transition, best reasons known to him. Now, being friends with IBB, all these things are all political maneuvering. And then the military is saying they want to hand over to civilians now. Why are you against it? Therefore, it means these are personal interests, hence the political maneuvering. And these are things which ought not to stand in the way. Or could it be that Nzeribe didn't even like the Abiola in question? Those are questions which are rhetorical that people will keep still asking as a result of this book.
All right, let's talk about Babangida's reflection now on the June 12 election. What important lessons can be drawn about the importance of transparency and communication during political crisis? Because probably if there were proper communication to the people that so is going on in the country, and because of this we can't do this, sometimes it is said that even in situations like that, communicating to the people is another way out. So what lessons do you think can be drawn from this? When it comes to election in Nigeria, even up to date, the transparency, communication, and accountability has not been upheld up to this moment. So what do you think can be done, and what do you think we might learn from this situation, like going on in regards to this book?
When it comes to communication and transparency, first of all, the information getting to IBB was not while he was on seat. That's another thing.
Yeah.
There's need for people to be aware of what is going on. This information now about the annulment of the election took place while he was away. And if you might recall, that period is not now where you can send messages just at the click of a button. It wasn't popular, or it wasn't available back then. So for people to have communicated understanding, to have taken time to get to another person. And that time now is what another person will now capitalize on to act faster than another person. And trying to let people know communication and transparency. You're letting us know now that Abiola won the elections now. Why didn't you communicate this to us back then? Why was it that you had to come with Ikomo, who was now changed, whose position was changed from the Chief of Defense Staff to Chief of General Staff? Why? Because the powers had to be limited, because you saw that the likes of Idiagbon was really, really powerful until it was, of course, ousted. The same thing with Abacha, who had actually started assuming such control. So these are things we need to even look at. By the time you begin to weigh the options, you're asking yourself, you repeating it 32 years after, to be specific now, it therefore means that even the populace there at large will begin to have mixed reactions. Of course, definitely for 6 days now, from when the book had been released, tongues had actually been wagging. And it's a case of, should posthumous awards be given to those who were in the election? Have they passed on or whatever? We should ask ourselves this question. It will not heal the wounds. So the earlier the better. Futuristically speaking, those who come on board, leaders to be specific, if we know that this thing is going to mar the situation on ground, I think you should let the people know the bitter truth instead of trying to like curb the whole reality and people begin to suffer in the long run. Protests begin to erupt in the process and people begin to hate each other. Some discord begins to set in.
Yeah, I think I agree with you, because with the situation of things in the country, the people are not even trusting the people in government. Now, something like this is coming up after 32 years. It's another reason to not trust them the more. And I just feel like you said, this could have come up earlier than this time. It could have even come up, say, 10 years after. I think as at that time, probably Moshood is still alive and all of that. And then, things could have, probably, you might, exactly, we might have worked things out. But lastly, I would like to know your opinion. What role does public perception play in shaping a political leader legacy, specifically in the context of Babangida's regime?
Well, because of the whole events that have actually surrounded the regime, the bad has actually outweighed the good he did. Let me put it that way. Talking about the letter bomb for Dele Giwa, the annulment of the elections, because specifically these two, the annulments and the bombing, bombing of Dele Giwa, which of course he was quite reserved about and said nothing about that. Specifically, let's zero in on the elections. He will forever be known for not rewriting history by owning up to the fact that, of course, the chief executive actually said that he should have actually done the needful as at that time. Yeah. And he repeated it again when he was actually, of course, releasing the book. There will always be opinions, variations of opinions by different people. Why? Because just like I've said now, my own opinion is, why did it take him that long? Some other person can come 32 years, full-fledged adults. So ladies will be having their third or fourth children.
Sincerely.
So we look at it, people will have their own opinions. Other people, upon hearing that his reason for doing that was because of security concerns. Even up to now, we still have serious security concerns. Because I remember as a child at 1995, we still had banditry in the north. But it wasn't as pronounced as it was now. So insecurity will always be there. There's insecurity even in the US. When someone gets pissed off, you see someone carrying an AK-47 into a school and it sprays sporadically everywhere. So that's another form of insecurity. It's all in variations. So security concerns, as the head of state, he had all the apparatus within his power and means to make sure that that election was perfected. At least Jonathan did that. So I think it would have even been more effective. Why? Because he was at that time a military ruler and a dictator. So his yes is yes and his no would have been no. No one would have opposed.
And then the respect would have been, up the roof, because people would have respected him for what he did. And, just coming out now, I wouldn't like to say this, but it just shows that, well, in some cases, we can call him a coward for not coming out then to tell us the truth. But we would also be grateful that at least we got to know the truth, even though whatever happened then cannot be undone. It is there for life, and probably, like you said, maybe families of Moshood Abiola can be awarded, in order to at least make things look a little bit better on the outside. History may yet prove kinder to Babangida as his courage in the face of adversity, his foresight in navigating Nigeria through tumultuous years, and his attempt to create a more inclusive political system may secure his place as a statesman rather than a villain of Nigerian politics. His autobiography, now a critical piece of Nigeria's political history, offers a personal vindication of a man who, despite the shadow of June 12 and other major events, firmly believes in the legacy of service he crafted for its country. I'm Olaiton Babatunde, and the show has been Viewpoint, and with me has been Odiawa here. I thank you for joining me on the show.
Always a pleasure.
You can also follow us on all our social media platforms at VG Media. Thank you for watching.